My name is Sarah, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this. Blood doesn't always mean family. Growing up, I was always the shadow in my own home. My parents had one golden child, my older brother, Michael. From the moment he was born, the sun rose and set with him. He was the apple of their eye, the shining beacon of our family name, and me. I was the afterthought, the quiet one, the child who was there but never really noticed. When I was little, I would draw pictures and run to show them to my parents. My father would barely look up from his work papers. My mother would give a distracted smile before turning her attention back to Michael, who could do no wrong. If Michael scribbled 2 lines on a page, it was a masterpiece. If I spent hours on mine, it was forgotten the moment I set it down. At school recitals, they'd sit in the front row with bouquets of flowers for Michael. They'd clap politely for me, but their eyes would shine only when it was his turn to perform. Birthdays told the same story. Michael got elaborate parties with dozens of guests, cakes taller than me, and mountains of presents. I got a cake at home, maybe 1 or 2 gifts, and a reminder not to expect too much. It hurt, of course. What child doesn't want their parents' love? But over time, I learned not to expect it. Instead, I turned to the only people who ever made me feel truly seen. My grandparents, Robert and Margaret, were everything my parents were not. Where my parents ignored me, my grandparents listened. Where my parents criticized, my grandparents encouraged. They lived just a few miles away, and every weekend, I would run into their arms like I was finally home. Grandpa Robert was a tall man with kind eyes and a booming laugh. He'd sit me on his knee and tell me stories about his youth, about the hardships he faced building the business empire that supported our family. He taught me chess, patience, and the idea that true strength wasn't in money, but in character. Grandma Margaret was softer, gentler. She taught me how to bake cookies, how to sew, how to love without condition. She always said, "Sarah, you are stronger than you think. Never let anyone dim your light." Those words would stay with me long after she was gone. The contrast was glaring. At my parents' house, I was invisible. At my grandparents', I was cherished. I began to spend more and more time with them, sometimes even begging to stay overnight. And though my parents would roll their eyes, they rarely refused. It freed them up to lavish Michael with even more attention. Michael, of course, loved the attention. He grew into it like a prince raised in a palace. Arrogant, entitled, always certain the world would bend to his will. If he wanted something, he got it. If I wanted something, I was told to stop being selfish. I remember one Christmas vividly. I was 10, Michael was 12. He got a brand new bike, gleaming red with silver handlebars. The kind of gift every kid dreams about. Me, I got a sweater, 2 sizes too big. When I looked at it, confused, my mother said, "Well, you'll grow into it." That was the moment I realized I could never compete with Michael in my parents' eyes. To them, he was the heir. I was just extra. But my grandparents saw it differently. That same Christmas, they gave me a small locket with my initials engraved on the front. Inside was a tiny picture of the 3 of us together. I wore it every day after that, a reminder that someone, somewhere, loved me for me. As the years went by, the gap widened. Michael became the Golden Boy Star athlete, top of his class, showered with praise and opportunities. I became the quiet, studious one, excelling in school but receiving little recognition at home. My parents bragged about Michael to everyone who would listen. About me, silenced by the time we were teenagers. It was obvious. Michael was being groomed to inherit everything. My father brought him to business meetings, introduced him to powerful contacts, and talked about the future of our legacy. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even considered. But my grandparents noticed. They noticed everything. And they quietly, carefully, began to plant seeds of their own. One afternoon, when I was 16, my grandfather called me into his study. The room smelled of leather and old books, filled with heavy shelves and photographs of his long career. He motioned for me to sit. "Sarah," he said, his voice serious, "I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are." I frowned. "Grandpa, I don't." He held up a hand. "I know how your parents treat you. I know how they favor Michael. But you, Sarah, you have something he doesn't. You have resilience, integrity, heart. One day, those things will matter, more than charm or arrogance. One day, you'll see why we've always believed in you." I didn't fully understand at the time, but his words sank into me. And my grandmother, sitting in her rocking chair, nodded in agreement. "Listen to your grandfather," she said softly. "There will come a day when you'll have to stand on your own. And when that day comes, you'll realize you were never the forgotten one. You were the chosen one." I didn't know then what they meant. But I would. Oh, I would. For now I clung to their love like a lifeline, because at home, things only grew worse. My parents' expectations of Michael grew higher, and their disdain for me grew sharper. If I spoke up, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. Nothing I did was right. By the time I left for college, I barely spoke to my parents. They helped pay for Michael's tuition at a prestigious private university, while I was left to scrape by with scholarships and part-time jobs. But I didn't mind. In fact, I preferred it, because away from them, I could finally breathe. Still, every holiday, every family gathering, the same dynamic played out. Michael, the star, me the shadow. Until the day it all changed. The day my grandparents died. It was sudden, a car accident. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. My world collapsed. I cried for days, feeling like I had lost the only people who ever truly loved me. But even in death, they had one final lesson to teach me. Because at the reading of their will, everything I thought I knew about my place in the family would be turned upside down. And the golden boy would finally see what it felt like to live in my shadow. The funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. I stood in the front pew, clutching the locket my grandmother had given me, staring at the polished mahogany caskets. My parents wept loudly, putting on a performance for the crowd of business associates, neighbors, and family friends. Michael played his part too, looking grief-stricken, shaking hands, accepting condolences as though he were the true heart of the family. Me, I stayed quiet. My grief wasn't a show. It was raw, suffocating, almost unbearable. When the service ended, and the last guest left the cemetery, the lawyer approached us. His name was Mr. Whitaker, a thin, sharp man with silver hair and glasses, perched on his nose. He cleared his throat gently and said, "The will has been prepared. If you'd all come to my office tomorrow afternoon, we can proceed with the reading." My father straightened his tie, nodding gravely. "Of course, we'll be there." On the drive home, Michael leaned back in his seat, smirking faintly. I wonder what they left me. Probably Grandpa's watch collection. Or maybe the lake house. My parents chuckled softly, as though the idea was natural. My mother reached over to squeeze his hand. "You've always been their pride, Michael. I'm sure they took good care of you." I sat silently, staring out the window. A storm brewed in my chest, though I didn't know why. Something told me tomorrow was going to change everything. The next day we arrived at Mr. Whitaker's office. It was a large wood-paneled room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather chairs. The four of us sat at the long oak table, father at the head, my mother beside him, Michael leaning back with an air of entitlement, and me quietly at the end, as though I barely belonged. Mr. Whitaker opened a folder and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you for coming. Your grandparents, Robert and Margaret, were very deliberate in drafting their will. They wanted their wishes honored exactly as written. I will now read their statement." He cleared his throat and began. "To our children, we leave our love, but over the years, we have seen where our true legacy belongs. To our granddaughter Sarah, who has shown kindness, perseverance, and strength of character, we leave our estate, our properties, our shares in the company, and our financial assets. In total, this inheritance amounts to $26 million. The room went silent. I blinked, stunned. My heart pounded in my ears. $26 million. Inheritance. Me. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists on the table. Michael's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Mr. Whitaker continued, as if nothing were amiss. "Additionally, Sarah is to receive the family home and all personal heirlooms of sentimental value. This decision is final and reflects Robert and Margaret's deepest wishes." He set the papers down, folding his hands neatly. "That concludes the reading." I sat frozen, my mind spinning. My grandparents had left everything. To me, not Michael, not my parents. Me. The silence shattered when my father slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. Absolutely absurd." My mother's voice rose sharply. "There must be some mistake. They adored Michael. They always said he'd inherit the family legacy." Michael turned on me, his face twisted in fury. "What did you do, Sarah? Did you manipulate them?" Did you poison them against us? I recoiled, shocked. What? No. I had no idea. My father cut me off, his voice cold and venomous. You expect us to believe they left everything to you out of love. You've always been quiet, manipulative, sneaky. Robert and Margaret's wishes are crystal clear. Mr. Whittaker interrupted firmly. The will is legally binding. There is no mistake. My parents exchanged a look, their anger simmering just beneath the surface. My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at me. You will give it to us, all of it. My throat went dry. What? The inheritance, she hissed. It belongs to this family. To Michael, hand it over. I shook my head slowly, disbelief coursing through me. It was their choice. They wanted me to have it. I'm not just giving it away. Michael slammed his fist down. You selfish brat. You don't deserve any of it. You've done nothing for this family. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My grandparents' words echoed in my head. Never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. I straightened my back and looked at them, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. I'm keeping what they gave me. It was their decision, not mine. If you can't respect that, then maybe you never really respected them. The room went deathly quiet. My parents stared at me like I had just betrayed them, when in truth, it was they who had betrayed me long ago. Finally, my father stood, his face red with rage. Fine, if you won't hand it over willingly, we'll find another way. Mark my words, Sarah, you'll regret this. They stormed out of the office, Michael trailing behind, glaring at me with pure hatred. I sat there, trembling, my heart pounding. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Because if my parents wanted a war over my grandparents' legacy, then a war they would get, and I was ready to fight. When I left Mr. Whittaker's office that day, I felt two things at once: empowerment and dread. Empowerment because, for the first time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. My grandparents had trusted me, believed in me, and given me something they knew my parents would never understand. But dread, because I had seen the look in my father's eyes, the venom in my mother's voice, and the hatred burning in Michael's glare. They weren't going to let this go, and I was right. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. Sarah, she began, her voice sweet, syrupy, in a way that immediately set off alarms. I know yesterday was emotional, but your father and I have been talking, and we think it would be best for everyone if you transfer the inheritance into our accounts. Just temporarily, of course. We'll manage it for you, invest it properly, make sure it grows. You're too young to handle that kind of responsibility. I gripped the phone tighter. Mom, I'm not stupid. You don't want to manage it, you want to take it? Her tone hardened instantly. Don't you dare speak to me like that. Everything you have, you owe to us. If it weren't for us, you wouldn't even exist. That money is ours by right, and if you had an ounce of decency, you'd hand it over to support this family. My chest tightened. There it was, the guilt trip. The first of many. I'm not giving it to you, I said firmly. And hung up. That was when the real war began. Over the next week, the pressure came from every angle. My father cornered me at the family home, his voice low and threatening. You think you can handle $26 million on your own? You'll waste it, you'll lose it. And when you do, don't come crawling to us. Hand it over now, and we'll make sure you're taken care of. I refused. Michael showed up at my apartment one night, pounding on the door until I opened it. His face was red, his words slurred with alcohol. You think you're better than me now. You think you're smarter because they left it to you. You're nothing, Sarah, nothing. That money was supposed to be mine. I was supposed to carry the family name, the business, the legacy. You stole it from me. I tried to shut the door, but he shoved his foot inside. Give it to me, right now. We can fix this before Mom and Dad lose their minds completely. Do the right thing for once in your life? I shoved back hard enough to slam the door in his face, my hands shaking as I locked it. His furious shouts echoed down the hallway as he left. The next day, I discovered my credit cards had been frozen. My father had pulled strings at the bank, leveraging his connections to cut me off financially. 2 days after that, I walked into my job at the cafe where I worked part-time, only to be told they had to let me go. Why? Because my mother had called the manager and told them I was mentally unstable and a liability. And then came the rumors. Family friends stopped returning my calls. Old classmates whispered about me on social media. The story circulating was that I had manipulated my grandparents, pressured them into changing the will, and cut my parents and brother out unfairly. At first, I was devastated. How could my own parents spread lies about me? But then I remembered the look on their faces in Mr. Whitaker's office. The fury, the greed, the sheer entitlement. Of course, they'd do this. They had never cared about me, only about control. One night, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. My stomach dropped as I pushed it open and saw the mess inside. Drawers pulled out. Papers scattered. Jewelry gone. Someone had broken in. I knew instantly who it was. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage, and something inside me hardened. Enough was enough. They wanted war. Fine, I'd give them war. But unlike them, I wouldn't stoop to sloppy threats and cheap tricks. No, if they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. Because my grandparents hadn't just left me money, they'd left me wisdom. And I was about to use every ounce of it. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for something I never thought I'd need. A private investigator. If my parents wanted to destroy me, I was going to find out everything about them, every secret, every skeleton, every hidden weakness. When the investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Laura, agreed to take the case, I told her everything. About the inheritance, about the threats, about the break-in. She leaned back in her chair, a small smile tugging at her lips. You want me to dig into your parents and brother? See what they're hiding? I nodded. Yes, they think I'm weak, they think I'll give in. But if I'm going to fight them, I need leverage. Laura's smile widened. Don't worry, Sarah. Everyone has something to hide. And I'm very good at finding it. As I left her office that night, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, and beneath that hope, something darker. The beginning of revenge. Laura, my investigator, wasted no time. Within a week, she began feeding me details. At first it was small things, unusual bank transfers, whispers of unpaid debts, charitable donations that didn't quite add up. But every little piece was fuel for the fire burning inside me. And I would need it. Because while Laura dug into their past, my parents were doubling down in the present. The phone calls never stopped. Morning, noon, and night demands, accusations, guilt trips. Sarah, you're destroying this family. My mother would sob into the phone. Do you know how it feels, watching your own daughter turn her back on us after everything we've done? Ungrateful brat, my father growled in another call. You think you're powerful now, but you're nothing without us. That money will ruin you? Better to let us manage it before you embarrass yourself. Michael's calls were worse. Drunken rants, screaming that I'd ruined his future, threats I knew he wasn't brave enough to follow through on, but still, they chilled me. I blocked their numbers. They found new ones. I moved apartments. They tracked me down. Then the letters started. Typed notes slipped under my door. Messages, left in my mailbox. Always the same theme. Give us the inheritance, or you'll regret it. I kept them all. Every last one. Evidence it didn't stop at harassment. They escalated in ways I hadn't expected. One afternoon, as I walked home from the grocery store, I noticed a man in a dark car trailing me. Every corner I turned, he turned. Every stoplight, he stopped. My heart pounded as I ducked into a crowded cafe, watching through the window until he finally drove away. Another night, someone smashed the back window of my car. Nothing was stolen, they just wanted me to know they could reach me. And then, the worst of it, I came home to find my cat, Daisy, missing. The door hadn't been forced, nothing was stolen, but Daisy was gone. Hours later, she turned up in the stairwell, frightened but unharmed. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were trying to break me. That was when Laura delivered the first real blow of hope. Your mother's charity, she said, sliding a folder across the table. It's a sham. She's been siphoning donations into personal accounts for years. I've got the paper trail, emails, transfers, everything. My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. She's stealing. Not just stealing. Laundering. Laura said calmly. If this went public, she'd be finished. A surge of satisfaction rushed through me. For years, my mother had looked down on me, dismissed me, told me I was worthless. And now, I held the evidence that could destroy her carefully crafted reputation. Laura wasn't done. Your brother, she continued, he's in deep with gambling debts. Casino markers, loan sharks, you name it. He owes hundreds of thousands. I've got photos of him with some very unsavory characters. He's hiding it from your parents, but it won't stay hidden for long. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course. Michael, the golden boy, drowning in vice. And your father, Laura said, her eyes narrowing, is the crown jewel. He's been embezzling from his own company for over a decade. Millions. If his board finds out, he'll lose everything. And if the authorities get hold of this, he could face prison. I sat back, stunned. It was almost too much to process. My parents had built their lives on power and appearances, but beneath it all, they were rotting. And now, their secrets were mine. But I didn't strike immediately. No, that would have been too easy. Revenge wasn't about speed, it was about precision. About waiting until the knife would cut deepest, so I let them keep escalating. My father tried to freeze my accounts again, but this time I was ready. I had already moved most of the funds into trusts he couldn't touch. He was furious when he realized he'd failed. My mother went public, calling me unwell in a magazine interview, claiming my grandparents had been confused when they wrote the will. I stayed silent, letting her lies pile up. Michael showed up drunk at my door again, this time falling to his knees. Please, Sarah, just give me some of it. Just a little. I can't keep living like this. His tears might have been convincing if I hadn't seen the casino receipts Laura had dug up. Each attack only steeled my resolve. Each lie, each betrayal, each attempt to crush me only made me stronger, because now, I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing the opening moves of my revenge, and when I finally struck, it wouldn't just hurt them, it would annihilate them. Laura wasn't just good at her job, she was relentless. Where most people might have stopped at uncovering a few incriminating documents, she kept digging like a bloodhound who smelled gold. And the deeper she dug, the more filth she uncovered. I began meeting her twice a week in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. We always chose the same corner booth, away from curious ears. To anyone else, we probably looked like two friends catching up over coffee, but in reality, every meeting was a war council. One evening, Laura slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "This," she said, "is going to be your arsenal." I opened it carefully, the weight of it making my hands tremble. Inside was a neatly organized collection of bank statements, emails, photographs, and signed affidavits from people who had once worked with my parents. "Your mother's been siphoning millions through her so-called charities," Laura explained. "On paper, it looks like fundraising for schools and hospitals. But the money is rerouted into shell companies, and from there, directly into her personal accounts. I've tracked at least 8 different fronts." I stared at the papers in disbelief. My mother, who spent her life lecturing me on responsibility, morality, and keeping up appearances, was nothing more than a polished thief. Laura leaned in closer. "If this gets out, she'll be ruined. The IRS will eat her alive. And society, they'll devour her whole." A slow smile spread across my face. My mother had always cared more about her reputation than her children. Taking that away from her would be like setting fire to her soul. But Laura wasn't finished. "Now, your brother Michael," she continued, pulling out another folder. "This one's a train wreck." She showed me photographs of Michael staggering out of casinos at 3 in the morning, arm in arm with strangers, copies of loan agreements signed in desperation, casino markers he'd tried to skip out on. "He owes more than $200,000, Laura said flatly. "And not to banks, to loan sharks. Dangerous people." I skimmed through the photos, my jaw tightening. So while I had been scraping together part-time jobs in college, Michael had been burning through fortunes at roulette tables and poker games, and your parents have been covering for him, Laura added, paying off debts, smoothing things over. Until recently. Looks like they're tired of bailing him out. I almost laughed at the irony. The golden child, drowning in debt, abandoned by the very people who had once worshipped him, but it was the final folder that truly shook me. "This," Laura said softly, "is your father." The documents inside were staggering. False contracts, altered books, millions of dollars funneled out of his company into offshore accounts, payments disguised as consulting fees that led nowhere. "Your father has been embezzling for over a decade," Laura said. "It's meticulous, but sloppy in places. If his board finds out, he's done. And if federal investigators ever get their hands on this, he could go to prison for a long time." I stared at the folder, my heart pounding. My father, the powerful, untouchable CEO, who had once told me I would never amount to anything, he was nothing more than a fraud in an expensive suit. And now, his secrets were in my hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the files Laura had given me, reading them over and over again. Each page felt like a brick in a fortress I was building around myself. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of my family. For the first time, I had power. But power is nothing without patience. I wanted to march into their house and throw the evidence on the table. I wanted to watch their faces as their world crumbled. But Laura had warned me, revenge isn't a sprint, Sarah, it's a marathon. Wait until the knife cuts deepest. So I waited. Meanwhile, my parents continued their campaign of terror. My father sent a lawyer to negotiate with me, but the moment I showed him copies of the embezzlement files, he turned pale and left without another word. My father never mentioned lawyers again. My mother tried to corner me at a charity gala, pretending to forgive me in front of the cameras. I smiled sweetly, hugged her for the photographers, and whispered in her ear, "I know about the charities." She froze, her smile cracking, and I walked away. Michael kept calling, begging, threatening, promising. I let him stew. I knew his debts were closing in. I knew he was running out of time. Piece by piece, I was tightening the noose. One evening, Laura asked me, "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once you start, there's no turning back. They'll be destroyed. Completely." I thought of the years of neglect, the cruelty, the way they had abandoned me at every turn, only to come crawling when I inherited something they wanted. I thought of Daisy, my cat, left terrified in a stairwell, of the smashed car window, of the letters and the threats and the endless demands. And I said, I don't just want to go through with it, I need to. Laura nodded, sliding a smaller folder across the table. Then let's begin. I suggest we start with your brother. That was the moment everything shifted. Until now, I had been surviving, enduring, defending myself against their attacks. But from that night forward, I was no longer on defense. I was on the attack, and the first target was Michael. Michael had always been reckless. But the deeper Laura dug, the clearer it became. He wasn't just reckless, he was self-destructive. Gambling wasn't a hobby for him. It was an addiction, a black hole that consumed everything in its path. And he was sinking fast. I knew from Laura's reports that he was borrowing money from anyone foolish enough to lend it. Friends, business, partners, even dangerous people. I also knew that he'd started defaulting on those loans. Debts were piling up faster than he could hide them. For years, my parents had quietly cleaned up his messes, paid off debts, smoothed things over, shielded him from consequences. But now, with me holding the inheritance, they had stopped. They were too busy trying to pry money out of me to save Michael, and without their protection, he was exposed. The first time I put my plan into motion, it felt like a test-on experiment in pulling strings. I contacted one of his creditors, anonymously, and confirmed Michael's assets were drying up. I accidentally leaked that he'd been cut off from family money. Within a week, the sharks started circling. Phone calls, threats, demands for repayment. Michael panicked. One evening, just past midnight, there was a pounding on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw him disheveled, drunk eyes red from crying. I didn't want to let him in, but part of me needed to hear him, to see just how far he'd fallen. When I opened the door, he stumbled inside without asking, double quotes, "Sarah, you have to help me," he slurred. "They're going to kill me. Please, just give me some of it. You don't need all that money, just a few $100,000. That's nothing to you." I crossed my arms. "And what will you do when you lose that too? Gamble it away? Run back crying again?" His face twisted with rage. "This isn't my fault. You stole that money. It should have been mine. You were nothing growing up. Nothing. They gave you scraps, and you deserved it. And now you think you're better than me." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I had expected this. "You're right," I said coldly. "I was nothing to you. But that's the difference between us, Michael. I learned how to survive without them. You never did." He broke then, dropped to his knees, begged, sobbed, promised he'd change, promised he'd get help, but I had seen the casino slips, the loan shark agreements, the photos of him laughing with dealers at 3 in the morning. He wasn't going to change. And I wasn't going to save him. The final nail in Michael's coffin came 2 weeks later. Through Laura, I arranged for certain documents, his unpaid markers, photos of him with known criminals, to make their way into the hands of people he owed. Not enough to get him killed, but enough to make sure the pressure was unbearable. At the same time, I slipped information to a journalist known for exposing local scandals. Anonymously, of course. Within days, headlines were splashed across the city. Prominent family's son drowning in gambling debts. Michael's carefully crafted image as the successful heir. The charming young entrepreneurate shattered overnight. Business partners pulled out of deals. Friends distanced themselves. The same people who once worshipped him now whispered behind his back. And my parents. They were furious. My father called me in a rage. "You did this," he snarled. "I know it was you. Your brother's life is falling apart, and you're sitting there, laughing." I let a beat of silence stretch. Then, said simply, "Maybe he shouldn't have bet his life away." "You're heartless," he spat. "No," I corrected him. "I'm just done being your victim." I hung up. Weeks later, I ran into Michael at a cafe. He looked like a ghost, sunken eyes, shaking hands, clothes that no longer fit. He saw me and froze, shame etched across his face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the years he'd spent mocking me, belittling me, taking everything for granted while I struggled to get by. I remembered the night he screamed at me, drunk, demanding I hand over the inheritance or pay the price. So instead of pity, I gave him a cold smile and walked past without a word. Because Michael was the first lesson, the first to fall, and I was only getting started. If Michael's downfall was like watching a house of cards collapse, my mother's would be more like tearing down a cathedral. She had spent her entire life building her empire of respectability, charities, luncheons, speeches about giving back. People admired her, envied her, believed she was a woman of grace and generosity, but I knew the truth. Thanks to Laura, I had an entire archive of proof that my mother's charities were nothing more than laundromats for her greed. The money that should have gone to schools and hospitals had bought her luxury handbags and financed vacations to Paris. She didn't just lie to her family, she lied to the world, and I was going to make sure the world saw it. It started small. Anonymous tips sent to journalists. Whispers in the right social circles. Copies of suspicious bank transfers accidentally landing on the desk of a tax investigator. The storm built slowly, like dark clouds gathering on the horizon. At first, she brushed it off. When the first article appeared, Charity Queen, accused of financial mismanagement, she laughed it away at a dinner party, claiming it was the work of jealous rivals. But then more reports came, headlines grew harsher. Donors began pulling out. Invitations to galas disappeared. Her phone, once filled with calls from society's elite, went silent. And then, the reporters started showing up at her door. I watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. On TV, I saw her face, once so composed, twisted in barely concealed panic as cameras followed her into her limousine. "Mrs. Ellis, did you divert charity funds for personal use? Are you under federal investigation? What do you say to the families who never saw the donations promised to them?" Her mask cracked. She snapped at a reporter, and the clip went viral. Overnight, the woman who had once been admired became a laughingstock, but I wasn't done. One evening, I attended a gala where she was still desperately trying to hold on to her crumbling reputation. Dressed in pearls and a gown, she worked the room with that familiar fake smile, pretending nothing was wrong. I waited until she spotted me across the room. Her smile faltered for a moment before she forced it back into place. She walked over, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Sarah," she said, voice dripping with sugar. "How lovely of you to come." I leaned in, kissed her cheek for the cameras, and whispered in her ear, "I know everything. The shell companies, the transfers, the vacations you said were for charity work. It's all coming out." Her body went rigid. The smile froze. For a brief second, I saw the terror in her eyes. Then, with a shaky laugh, she pulled back and continued pretending for the crowd. But she knew her time was almost up. The final blow came weeks later. Laura helped me send the full file, every document, every incriminating detail to federal authorities. It didn't take long for the investigation to go public. Agents raided her office. Accounts were frozen. Her so-called charities were shut down overnight. And with that, her empire of lies burned to the ground. She called me, of course, screaming, crying, begging. "How could you do this to your own mother?" She wailed. "Do you have any idea what they're saying about me? My life is ruined. You'll regret this. Sarah, you'll regret." I cut her off. "No, Mother, you ruined your own life the day you chose greed over love. The day you chose Michael over me. The day you abandoned me at every turn. I didn't ruin you. I just revealed you." And I hung up. For days, her face was plastered across every newspaper, every website, socialite exposed in multi-million-dollar charity fraud. She became the cautionary tale, the fallen queen. Friends abandoned her. Strangers mocked her. She had always cared more about her reputation than her children. And now, that reputation was ashes. Watching it happen, I didn't feel pity. I felt vindication. Michael had been the first lesson, my mother was the second, and now, only one remained. My father had always been the fortress of the family. Cold, calculating, and commanding. When he spoke, people listened. When he entered a room, the air shifted. He thrived on control, and he believed no one, not his board, not the government, not even his own daughter, could touch him. But Laura's files told a different story. Behind the tailored suits and polished speeches was rot, years of embezzlement, cooked books, and millions siphoned into offshore accounts. The fortress wasn't as strong as he thought. It was crumbling, and I held the wrecking ball. I knew I couldn't rush this. My father wouldn't break like Michael, and he wouldn't unravel like my mother. He would fight back with everything. He had to bring him down. I had to be surgical. The first move was subtle. Anonymous leaks to a few trusted board members. Copies of altered contracts. Mysterious consulting fees that led nowhere, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Within weeks, whispers started circulating inside his company. Investors asked quiet questions. Rumors reached the press, though nothing had been confirmed yet. My father responded exactly as I expected, by tightening his grip. He held emergency meetings, barked orders, reassured shareholders with that confident voice of his. To the outside world, he looked unshaken. But Laura told me what was really happening. Frantic calls to his lawyers, panicked emails, secret meetings with accountants. For the first time in his life, my father was scared. But fear wasn't enough. I wanted destruction. The second move was bigger. Through a trusted journalist, I leaked a comprehensive package. Years of fraudulent transfers, offshore, account numbers, insider testimonies. It was explosive, undeniable, impossible to bury. The story hit like a bomb. Corporate titan under fire for multi-million-dollar embezzlement scandal. The headlines spread globally. His company's stock plummeted. The board called an emergency vote to remove him as CEO. Federal investigators opened a probe, and suddenly, the man who had once seemed untouchable was drowning. I remember the night he called me. His voice wasn't angry this time. It was broken. "Sarah," he rasped, "you don't know what you've done. They'll destroy me. Everything I built, gone. Is that what you wanted? To see your own father ruined?" I let his words hang. In the silence, before I answered, "You ruined yourself, father. You built your empire on lies, and now the truth is catching up. You wanted to control me, to own me. But I don't belong to you anymore. I never did." His voice cracked. "I did it all for this family?" "No," I said coldly. "You did it for yourself, and now you're alone." And I hung up. The aftermath was brutal. The board voted him out unanimously. His name was dragged through every paper, every news channel. His face, once associated with power, now symbolized greed and corruption. Investigators raided his offices. Former allies abandoned him overnight. At home, he raged. Neighbors whispered about the fall of the mighty Ellis patriarch. My mother, already disgraced, refused to be seen with him. Michael, drowning in his own chaos, couldn't help. For the first time in his life, my father had no control. But the true final blow came at the shareholders' meeting. I still remember standing at the back of the grand conference room, watching from the shadows as he tried to defend himself one last time. His voice was still strong, but his hands trembled as he gripped the podium. He promised it was all lies. Promised he would clear his name. And then, the board brought out the final evidence, the documents I had provided. Ironclad proof of his embezzlement. The room turned against him in an instant. His allies looked away. His enemies smiled. And in that moment, I knew the fortress had finally fallen. Afterward, I walked outside into the crisp evening air, a weight lifting from my chest. Michael was ruined. My mother was disgraced. And now, my father was destroyed. The revenge was nearly complete, but there was still one last step, the final devastating move that would erase any trace of their power, and I was ready to deliver it by the time I reached this stage. The battlefield had already been set. Michael was broken. My mother's reputation was in ruins, and my father's empire had crumbled. But their wealth of fortune they had always tried to control still lingered like a taunt. I had one final move to make. One strategic strike that would ensure they learned what it truly meant to underestimate me. It started with the inheritance itself. I had moved the funds into a series of trusts and accounts that were untouchable, offshore, protected, and structured in a way that no lawsuit, no threat, no plea could access. I had taken the money my grandparents had entrusted to me and made it untouchable. Then, I began strategically liquidating certain assets. The family home, the vacation properties, luxury cars, they were all sold quietly, anonymously, and the proceeds funneled into charitable foundations my grandparents had actually supported in their lifetimes. Every time a property sold, every time a bank account transferred, I imagined my parents' faces as they realized they would never touch a cent. But the final blow was psychological. I arranged for a private invitation-only gala, under the guise of a family reconciliation dinner. My parents, still clinging to the idea that I would give in, accepted eagerly. Michael stumbled along, desperate to maintain appearances. When the night came, I walked in wearing the calm, collected demeanor I had cultivated over the past months. Everything about me spoke of confidence and power. They expected tears, begging, surrender. They expected a daughter they could manipulate. Instead, I had a slideshow ready. Images, documents, evidence of every lie, every misdeed, every betrayal they had committed over the years. Every gamble, every embezzlement, every charity fraud. I revealed it to them, one by one, in front of their peers, their business associates, and neighbors. Michael's face turned white. My mother's hands trembled. My father, for once, had no words. And then came the final announcement. You've spent your lives trying to control me, to manipulate me, to take what isn't yours, I said, my voice steady, but I am done. I am keeping my grandparents' inheritance exactly as they intended. None of it will ever touch your hands. None of it will ever benefit you. And the money that was once yours to flaunt, you will never see again. Their disbelief was palpable. The rage, the shame, the fear it filled the room. You think this is over? My father growled. You'll regret this, Sarah. Mark my words. No, I interrupted. I've already won. From that night forward, I lived freely, unburdened by their lies, greed, and control. I had the money, yes, but more importantly, I had my peace. I had my dignity, and I had proven, beyond doubt, that underestimating me had been the gravest mistake of their lives. They could scream, beg, or threaten. They could try to claw back what they had lost. But the truth, the law, and my preparation were my shields. They could never touch what my grandparents had entrusted to me. And so I walked away, not with vengeance that poisoned me, but with the sweet, unshakable satisfaction of justice. Because in the end, revenge wasn't just about hurting them, was about reclaiming my life, my inheritance, and my future. And I had done it perfectly.